Hi, Elaine here from markergeek.com. Today I'm sharing the Copic colouring video for Stamping Bella's Uptown girl Grace the Graduate. This is the colouring video for the image that I coloured for the website product image and packaging. So she is the image that you will get the Copic colour map for if you have purchased the stamp from Stamping Bella. If you've purchased from another retailer, you can also email Emily at Stamping Bella to obtain the Copic colour map that I have created. I do these for all of the images that I colour for Stamping Bella. So if you're looking for a handy chart to show exactly which colours I used and where, you can get those. If you order directly from Stamping Bella, they appear in your online account there. Otherwise, you can email Emily to obtain them. Today, I thought that I would do a little voiceover for this particular video. I don't usually do them for the Copic colouring videos for the releases. However, I thought this would be a fun one to do a little voiceover for, just talking about both colouring black using Copic markers and colouring pleats and folds. So first off, I thought I'd talk about colouring black, as she's wearing a graduation gown and I will be colouring that in black. First off, I would say that you could just use a black marker or a black pencil, whatever. However, this would result in quite a flat looking image. There are two black Copic markers, 100 and 110. I do use these when I'm colouring black, but only to increase the depth of some of the shadows. I use it quite I use either one of them, and I use them quite sparingly. Really, to colour black, I use grey markers or grey pencils. In this case, we'll talk about Copic markers, but similar sort of principles will apply whatever medium you're using. So yeah, if you just use a black marker like 100, you will get quite a black, yes, obviously, you will get a quite flat looking image. You won't get a lot of variation or really any variation in tone, and some of your stamp lines will probably be obliterated, which will kind of reduce or diminish the visual interest in the image rather than enhancing it, which is what we're looking for. Also, if you've created some depth and interest in other areas of your image, if you've got a nicely shaded face or hair or whatever, if you've just got this big area of flat black colour, it's going to look quite weird and suck the life out of the rest of your image. So, to represent black, I use greys, and that's what you'll find that most people do. There are 4 grey families available in the Copic marker range. There are the warms, which are quite brown or earth toned. There are the cool greys, which are a cool bluish tone of grey. There are the neutrals, which are neutral. And there are the toner greys, which are a little bit less earthy than the warm greys. You don't have to have all of these, but they are all a little bit different, as I've mentioned. Starting out with the warm and cool families would give you a nice range of greys to play with, and that is certainly what I started out with. On this image, I used the toner greys. Warm greys and toner greys both work quite nicely for objects or materials that you might expect to be warm, like fabrics. My personal preference is usually to reach for the toner family over the warm grey family, mostly just because I prefer a slightly less earthy or brown tone to my greys. I didn't use the 100 or 110 black markers on this particular image. I simply used a range of the toner greys, starting with T4 and working up to T10. I skipped 2 in between each, which is what I usually tend to do. I usually skip at least 1 or 2 between each marker. So I went for T4, T6, T8 and T10, which gave me a really nice range of tones to work with. As for colouring the folds in this gown, which is what I'm about to do in a second, I tend to map out some rough folds, or basically some lines, using my lightest marker. So in this case, this would be the T4. Kind of use the lines of the image as a guide. As you can see on this one, there are some little sort of indentations and there are some little lines on the image that the artist has put in, which gives you a really good starting point for figuring out where you want to create some folds, create some pleats, creases, whatever. In this case, I kept it really simple. It's straight up and down. So just basically created some folds where the fabric might fall. So yeah, using the lightest marker, I will map out where I think I want my fold lines to be. I use the lightest marker for this, both because I generally tend to do this with most of my colouring. I tend to lay down a base of my lightest marker and then work from that, going to the dark and then back down to the lightest as I'm blending. In this case in particular, I do this in order to be able to change things easily. So if I map out the area with my lightest marker and I make a mistake, it's easier to cover up than it would be if I just went straight in with the darkest marker. So if I end up with a line where I'm like, don't really want that there, or if I kind of slip and create a wonky looking line, it's easier to kind of work with and cover up. Especially in this stage where you're kind of figuring things out. I might kind of look at it and put something in the wrong place, and as I'm working it sort of think, actually, you know, that didn't want to be there. If I'm using the lightest shade, I can easily cover that up with the others. I then work by applying some of the darkest shade really lightly over the top and not completely covering what I've done with my lightest marker. This way I can really slowly build up colour and create some really nice variations in the tone. And also it is easier to add colour than it is to take it away. So building up carefully and slowly allows for correcting issues and just building up that colour in a controlled way. And I'm a bit of a control freak, to be fair, so it works for me. It gets faster the more that you do it, the more that you practice, especially the more that you colour a particular image and you get to know where you like to put the folds in that particular image. One important thing I'd note is that it works best to work in the direction of the fabric, of the material. So in this case, working in strokes going up and down. If I were to colour from side to side, it would look a little bit weird. So yeah, keeping all of my marker strokes going in the same direction, up and down, and using a flicking motion, feathering it out so that it gets lighter towards the end of the stroke. And this is something it's really useful to practice for your colouring in general. You can do that on a scrap piece of paper, and just practice your marker control, so that you're able to get a nice variation in the flicks that you do, in the marker strokes that you do, working on sort of feathering them out at the end so that they kind of reach a nice sort of point. And you also don't want all of your strokes to be the same length. You're trying to create some variation and some interest. It's going to look a little bit weird if you've got uniform lines going up and down. So you want to vary kind of the thickness and where the lines stop. I like to have some coming from the bottom, some working down from the top. And then it kind of, as you blend out with your medium shade and your lighter shade, it kind of tends to soften it, and all kind of the magic happens. It's kind of hard to describe, but as you're working it, it will look a little bit weird to start with. It'll look a little bit too stark because you've got those bright white highlights left in the paper. And until you kind of reach the final stages, it can look a little bit strange. As you kind of go back in with your medium tone and your lightest tone towards the end, it will suddenly start to look much more natural, much more interesting, much better. If it's still looking weird to you, you probably need to keep going. This is often a problem with colouring, is that you can be afraid to keep going. You stop too soon. And really, especially with, say, Copic markers, it can be the case that just an extra pass with your mid-tone can really help to pull it all together. So yeah, as you can see, I worked from the lightest shade, mapping everything out, added that darkest shade, the T10, really lightly, applying some fine lines over the mapped out areas. Then I went to one of my medium shades, so went back to the T8 and extended those darkest lines out a little bit. Then went down to T6 and then covered the areas that were still left white with my T4. And each time you're kind of just slightly overlapping with the previous shade. You don't want to go over the darkest areas with your lightest shade too much, because that will start to push that colour around and you'll start to get a mottled effect as the lighter shade sort of causes the ink to move around, and kind of almost like the colourless blender will kind of push that ink around and cause it to lighten and go a little bit patchy. So what you want is your colours your shades to kind of overlap each other, keeping that lightest marker away from the very dark areas, because we don't want to lighten those particularly. And basically it's a case of working it, as I said, until you're happy with it. This is another reason why I preferred not to use the black markers on this particular one. And I often don't. I do sometimes, I often don't use them. They're not really necessary. With the darkest grey markers, you can get enough depth, enough darkness for the image to read as black. If I use the black markers, they are quite pigmented, and you can get a problem with, more of a problem with the pigment sitting on top of the paper and going a little bit sticky. And this is a point at which it becomes very difficult to work the colour further. So yeah, I knew that I would want to be working in quite a lot of layers with this one to get the desired effect. and I wanted to avoid that kind of sticky Copic marker issue, which I knew would happen if I used my 100 or 110 markers, because it just very often does. Yeah, so as I said, you may find that it looks a little bit weird, a little bit unnatural. There's going to be stages where you are not happy with it and you think, oh, this looks awful. Keep going, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't turn out well in the end, well, you already didn't like it anyway. So you may as well keep going and see how it works out. And if it doesn't work out well, you may have learned something. If it does work out well, then you will definitely have learned that you just need to keep going, and you will have increased your confidence in doing so. And at the end of the day, if you have to ditch it, it is just ink and paper, and you will at least have had the experience of trying something. So yeah, if you're thinking, oh, these pleats, these folds, creases, whatever, look weird, just keep trying. Keep layering some more ink and work on it, because quite often in this process it is just a case of working it further until you're happy with it. Don't stop too soon. You can keep working on extending some of those lines, and the magic, as I mentioned, does tend to happen in the kind of final stages of layering, with those kind of mid-tones and the lightest tone. You'll find a point at which you apply more of the mid-tone and then a little bit of the lightest tone over those highlight areas, and it just softens everything just perfectly and just looks right. So there were definitely stages with this one where it was like, yeah, okay, this looks a little bit iffy, but then just keep going with it is really all I'm saying. If you want to see more examples of how I've worked with some of the Stamping Bella stamped images with pleats and folds, I will link to a couple that I have done previously, both with videos. Those videos don't have commentary, but I have also in the posts for those videos included a small step-by-step guide with still images from the videos, just to help you have a reference for when you're working on your own images. So I will link to a blog post for this video in the description below, which will include links to everything, and I will also link to a couple of previous posts. As usual, I was working on my personal favourite paper for colouring, which is Make It Colour Blending Card. You will find a link to this in the description below, along with everything else. I hope you've enjoyed this video today and maybe found it useful. If you have, please do like and subscribe. If you've got any questions, please do leave them in the comments section. I'm happy to try and answer if I can. And that's it for today. I'll leave you for the rest of the colouring, and I will catch you next time.